Yoshino, the no-nonsense Yakuza princess of the Osaka Somei crew, ran the streets with a glare that could send losers packing. Nobody dared cross her, until her old man cut a deal with the Tokyo Miyama clan, throwing her into an engagement with their cocky brat, Kirishima. At first, he played the sweet, smooth act, but it didn't take long for his twisted, psycho side to show. This guy wasn't just bad news, he was a walking dumpster fire of chaos, even by Yakuza standards. Now, this badass princess and her unhinged prince are about to drag their so-called truce through the mud, one messed up move at a time. Kirishima Miyama leaned back in his chair, holding a photo his lackey had handed him. The girl in the picture looked harmless, innocent, even, but Kirishima knew better. This wasn't just a photo, it was the first domino in what was about to be the most chaotic year of his life. Over in Osaka, Yoshino was grilling her grandfather, Ranji, over a tabloid headline pairing her with some random dude from the Miyama Yakuza family. Who even was this guy, and why on earth were they engaged? Ranji smirked like the devil himself and spilled the tea. He'd fabricated the rumor to set her up with the Miyama heir, waxing poetic about how the kid reminded him of his younger self, all charm, swagger, and a truckload of chaos. Yoshino wasn't impressed. Sure, she was used to turning heads with her looks, but her grandfather's meddling was next level. Ranji waved off her complaints, saying the kid was just a high schooler and miles away from the actual Yakuza grind. He all but shoved her onto a train to Tokyo, leaving her no choice but to see it through. When she arrived at the Miyama family mansion, it was like stepping into a castle. Gaku, one of the lackeys, greeted her at the door, marveling at how much she looked like her grandfather. Feeling jittery, Yoshino asked where this Kirishima guy was. Before Gaku could answer, Kirishima appeared behind her, introducing himself in the kind of suave, casual way that screamed, "I don't care, but also, I totally care." He offered her a tour, adding she could leave if she wasn't feeling it. "The mansion's not a prison," he said. "Cool. Calm. No big deal." Except it was a big deal. Kirishima had expected her to hate the whole setup. He thought the tradition was outdated and figured she was just as much a victim of their grandfather's scheming as he was. Still, a tiny part of him hoped she might actually give him a chance. Yoshino, intrigued by Kirishima's chill demeanor, decided to transfer to his school, in private. Walking to class with him was oddly comforting. He didn't seem like the stereotypical Yakuza punk. But her first day was a mess. 3 girls immediately zeroed in on her, demanding to know if she was dating Kirishima. When she denied it, they slammed her desk, turning the classroom into a tense battleground. Meanwhile, Kirishima, oblivious to the drama, was shocked to learn he had fans at all. Most students avoided him like the plague, too scared of his Yakuza connections to even make eye contact. Yoshino quickly realized the school wasn't much better than Osaka. The stares, the whispers, it was like being back in her hometown, with judgment hanging in the air like smoke. But even with the weight of all that attention, she couldn't help but wonder if Kirishima's calm exterior was as unshakable as it seemed. That night, things escalated. Struggling to sleep, Yoshino glanced out her window and froze. There was Kirishima, drenched in blood, standing under the moonlight like a scene from a horror movie. She ducked out of sight, her heart racing. Her calm, collected classmate wasn't just tied to the Yakuza, he was in it. By morning, she tried to brush it off as a hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation. School wasn't much better. Girls whispered cruel rumors about her, claiming she had worked in the sex industry to clear debts. It was like déjà vu, a reminder of why she hated this kind of attention in the first place. Later that day, while out shopping with Kirishima, Yoshino stepped away to grab cash. Alone, she was cornered by 3 drunk guys who got too close, grabbing her shoulder and offering their help. She froze, panic rooting her to the spot. Enter Kirishima, stage left. Like a storm rolling in, he grabbed one of the men and made it painfully clear Yoshino wasn't someone to mess with. When one of them dared to push back, Kirishima snapped. He twisted the guy's arm and smashed a bottle over his head without breaking a sweat. The other 2 tried to retreat, but Kirishima wasn't done. He kept pounding the guy into the ground until Yoshino begged him to stop. Finally, he let the man go, but not before delivering a bone-chilling threat. "That girl is mine. Spread the word. Come back for revenge. Hell, bring your whole crew. It won't matter. You'll all regret it." As they walked away, Kirishima casually explained how sheltered Yoshino had been in Osaka. Things were different in Tokyo, he said. She needed to learn that fast. Yoshino, still shaken, pointed out the blood splattered on his hoodie. He shrugged it off and pulled the hoodie over his head, revealing tattoos that screamed danger. She froze, staring at the ink. As he moved closer, she slapped his hand away, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. He sighed, his tone heavy with frustration. This isn't going to work. Caught off guard, Yoshino asked what he meant. Kirishima's response was blunt. He'd expected her to be spoiled, selfish, and unbearable. Instead, she was normal. Too normal. To him, she was a burden. He even suggested she work in a brothel to make a quick $1,000,000, throwing out the most twisted solution he could think of. Yoshino, horrified, considered leaving. But as she cleaned the mud off her shoes, her first taste of bullying at school, she realized running wouldn't solve anything. Her grandfather called, urging her to stay in Tokyo for at least a year. His advice? Make Kirishima fall so hard he'd die for her, then leave him in ruins. Yoshino decided to play the long game. 2 weeks later, Kirishima was shocked when Yoshino returned to school with a swagger he hadn't seen before. She tossed her bag onto his desk and declared she wasn't going back to Osaka. Oh, and she'd sold her kidney for 4 million yen. Kirishima was stunned. His usual cool shattered as Yoshino stormed out to confront the girls who had bullied her. She threatened to ruin their lives if they messed with her again, her fierce determination leaving Kirishima in awe. He stopped her before she could leave, and then, to her utter confusion, he confessed his love. Kirishima was thrilled by the chaos she brought into his life. He didn't just want to date her, he wanted to marry her. He wanted her to keep turning his world upside down forever. Yoshino stared at him, wondering what on earth was wrong with his head. Yoshino had mastered the art of dodging Kirishima during lunch, practically going pro at slipping through the cracks. All she wanted was a little peace, but Kirishima had other plans. He kept popping up like a persistent Wi-Fi signal, his grin as smug as a cat that just knocked a glass off the counter. Her kidney transplant was acting up, and the stress of his constant shadowing was pushing her closer to the edge. How could this same guy, who once suggested selling a kidney as a life plan, turn around and declare his undying love? To make matters worse, he found her latest hiding spot with an explanation so creepy it could have come from a stalker's handbook. He'd slipped a GPS into her dictionary. Naturally, she smashed the device in fury. Kirishima, unbothered, casually mentioned that his father wanted to talk to her. But instead of facing Gaku, the Miyama patriarch, she ended up hosting Aoi and Suta, who brought some hot gossip to the table. The daughter of Yakuza Enterprises president had gone missing. The Yakuza family might not have been a major Yakuza power player, but Yoshino's name being dragged into their mess was bad news. She was ordered to stick with Kirishima until the missing girl was found, which only added fuel to her already raging fire. Kirishima, ever the rebel, ignored the whole stay-put directive and took Yoshino out to dinner. He didn't even pretend to be subtle, staring at her the entire time like she was the main dish. When she finally snapped and demanded to know why he liked her, his answer only made things worse. He said it was everything: her wit, her sharp tongue, the chaos she brought into his life. It was flattery with a razor's edge, and Yoshino could sense the danger in his words. That wasn't the only bombshell. Kirishima showed her a picture of Shirori Akazawa, the missing girl. Shirori, a spoiled rich kid and part-time drama queen, had been seen at a funeral 2 years ago, and Kirishima brushed it off like a footnote. But Yoshino was starting to connect the dots. If Shirori could disappear, what was stopping someone from snatching her, too? Kirishima, of course, dismissed her concerns. His own family ties were more complicated than a Yakuza family tree diagram. Gaku, technically his great-uncle, had taken him in when he was 12 after a violent incident left Kirishima's parents unable to handle him. The details were vague but unsettling. 20 kids, a pile of broken bones, and Kirishima at the center of it all. The tension escalated when Kirishima got a call about an Akaza man found dead. The guy had been running shady gaming rooms where Shirori had been a regular. Kirishima pieced it together. Shirori hadn't just vanished. She was tangled up in a mess involving gambling debts, the Filipino mafia, and a heist worth 500 million yen. While stuck in traffic, Yoshino spotted Shirori sneaking into a building. She called Kirishima, who casually confirmed her suspicions. Shiori's disappearance was probably a cover-up. Her father was laying low, likely trying to dodge her debt collectors. The kicker? The club Shirori was hiding in was tied to the Kirigayagumi, a faction connected to Yoshino's own family. Kirishima decided to retrieve Shirori, and Gaku gave the green light. The club was a sensory overload for Yoshino, who hated the loud music and flashing lights. Kirishima, on the other hand, navigated the chaos with ease. In the VIP room, Shirori spilled everything. She cheated at Baccarat, ripped off 500 million yen, and now needed to pay for protection. Kirishima kicked the door open like a one-man SWAT team. He sauntered in, introduced himself with the kind of confidence only a Yakuza heir could pull off, and told Shirori to report to the Miyama office to explain her mess. Things took a sharp turn when Kirigayagumi thugs barged in, shoving Yoshino aside. Kirishima retaliated instantly, stabbing one of them with a fork and kicking off a full-blown brawl. Yoshino watched in a mix of pain and horror as Kirishima unleashed his rage. When he was stabbed, her fury boiled over. She grabbed her brand new hair dryer, the same one she'd just bought, and smashed it over a thug's head. Kirishima, already pissed about Yoshino getting hurt, went berserk. He pummeled the guy relentlessly until Yoshino whacked him on the head and told him to chill. "Don't kill someone over a little blood," she snapped. Kirishima didn't care about Shiori's fate anymore. His focus was on Yoshino, her safety the only thing that mattered. Later, the fallout became clear. Shiori's father was expelled from the Yakuza, and Shirori fled overseas for safety. Kirishima got a beating for causing trouble on Kirigayagumi turf, but he shrugged it off. His share of the 500 million yen, 10 million, was handed to Yoshino as compensation for her ruined hair dryer and bruised pride. Yoshino didn't want the money. All she asked for was a new hair dryer and Kirishima's company. To her surprise, he agreed without hesitation. As they walked away, Kirishima noticed a man on a motorcycle watching them from a distance. It didn't sit right with him, but for now, he brushed it off, his focus squarely on Yoshino. Kirishima was in rare form, chilling with some poor girl he'd been stringing along when she got nosy about his love life. Without missing a beat, he whipped out a photo of Yoshino like he was showing off a rare collectible card. Her reaction? Pure cringe. She told him Yoshino wasn't even cute and he should move on. Kirishima, being the unhinged king he is, laughed in her face and said he'd rather burn Tokyo to the ground for Yoshino than settle for someone boring. Savage. Meanwhile, Yoshino had been feeling a bit watched. The kind of watch that made her sleep with one eye open and start Googling home security systems. Waking up in the middle of the night, she swore she felt Kirishima's presence. Paranoia? Maybe. Justified? Oh, definitely. She decided it was time to upgrade her locks and stash a blade under her pillow, because who wouldn't after dealing with this Yakuza psycho? Her instincts were dead on. That night, she woke up to find Kirishima in her room, looking like a horror movie villain with blood smeared across his face. Knife in hand, she was ready to gut him if he even blinked wrong. But instead of explaining why he looked like he'd just walked off a crime scene, he started braiding her hair. Like a maniac. She snapped, swung the knife, but of course, he caught her like it was nothing. His smug face didn't even flinch as he apologized, claiming he didn't realize she was awake. That smugness lit her up. She clocked him in the head, demanding to know what the hell he was doing. His confession? He'd made a copy of her key. Cue explosion. Yoshino tore into him with a verbal flamethrower, calling him every insult under the sun and telling him to stay the hell out of her space. Kirishima, the unkillable cockroach he is, just grinned and promised to be better. Then he hit her with an even creepier confession. He'd broken in because he wanted to see her sleeping face since she was always mad at him. Yoshino's glare could have melted steel. She told him she was always mad because he was a rule-breaking menace to society. But then she noticed the bruises and blood on him. For a split second, her anger faltered. When she asked about it, Kirishima brushed it off, saying Aoi had given him a beating for missing curfew. He even laughed about it. Classic Kirishima, laughing off what would break a normal person. His reckless honesty got under her skin, and she hated that she cared. He noticed her softening, just a little, and couldn't resist pushing further. Yoshino warned him she'd straight up kill a guy who cheated on her, thinking that might scare him off. Instead, his face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. He vowed to make her want to kill him someday, like it was the most romantic goal he could think of. She admitted she didn't hate him, but his unpredictability made her wary. Kirishima, chaos incarnate, took that as an invitation to double down. Pinning her to the spot with his blazing eyes, he declared his love once again. If he ever cheated, he promised to make sure she'd want to bury him 6 feet under. Romance, Yakuza style. The next day, Kirishima casually handed Yoshino her mail, including a letter from her grandfather. It contained an apology for the Knox Tokyo chaos and a request for her father's old photo album. Her father, who was anti-Yakuza and weak in fights, had left home after a blowout with her grandfather, only to die in a traffic accident before Yoshino was born. Kirishima also mentioned that her grandfather was coming to Tokyo for the Yakuza League meeting, a massive summit for the city's underworld big shots. He even showed her photos from past meetings, shocking her with how much he resembled Gaku. Kirishima explained his grandfather hated cameras, so these were some of the only pictures they had. During the meeting, Ranji was his usual self, cracking jokes with Gaku and stuffing candy into his pockets like a mischievous kid. Meanwhile, Yoshino got a call from a mysterious man who'd retrieved more of her father's photos, offering to check her old room for anything else. Later, Yoshino met with Takito Hotei, her grandfather's close family friend. Takito, ever nosy, poked around about Kirishima, clearly fishing for details. Yoshino nervously described Kirishima as mentally strong, carefully omitting the part where he was an unpredictable lunatic. Takito, who had helped raise Yoshino, suggested bringing Kirishima to Osaka over the summer. She wasn't thrilled about the idea, knowing Kirishima would turn her hometown upside down without a second thought. When Shouma arrived to drop off the album, Yoshino dragged him out for a shopping trip, ignoring his half-hearted protests. She was on a mission to upgrade his wardrobe whether he liked it or not. Shouma, naturally, took things too far and strutted out shirtless, looking like he was auditioning for a Chippendales show. Yoshino smacked some sense into him, demanding he put on a damn shirt before someone got a free show. Meanwhile, Kirishima was busy burning holes into a photo of Shouma like he was plotting his murder. Yoshino, already annoyed, told Shouma to cover up his tattoos. When he asked about Kirishima, she casually spilled her plan, make him fall for her, then toss him aside like yesterday's trash. Shouma laughed, warning her she might end up in the middle of a full-blown Yakuza war. That night, Yoshino wrestled with her feelings. Kirishima was dangerous, unpredictable, and maddening, but somehow, she trusted him. When Shouma offered to take her back to Osaka and even kill Kirishima if she wanted, she shut him down. Outside, Kirishima ran into Shouma. The tension was immediate. Kirishima, cocky as ever, called him out for smoking like he owned the place. He introduced himself with that smug grin, making it crystal clear who was in charge. Then he dropped the real flex. He was there to collect Yoshino, and no one else was walking away with her. Shouma asked if Kirishima had been following them, but Kirishima avoided the question, teasing Shouma for not noticing. He said he wasn't there to fight, especially with Yoshino's family, and if they married, Shouma would be his brother-in-law. Shouma, annoyed, asked who Kirishima worked for. Kirishima replied that he had known Ranji would disapprove of him marrying Yoshino but had still accepted it because he loved her. Yoshino showed up pissed, realizing Kirishima had gone full creep mode and cloned her phone to stalk her every move. She told him to quit the shady crap and just call her like a normal human being. He agreed, looking smug as hell, but the damage was done. As she got ready to bounce, Shouma grabbed her arm, straight up telling her she needed to pack her shit and head back to Osaka because Kirishima was one step away from a padded room. Before she could answer, Kirishima snatched her other arm, spouting off about how he was the only guy worthy of her. Shouma didn't miss a beat, calling him a psycho stalker to his face. Kirishima shot back that Shouma didn't get a vote in this, but Yoshino clapped back, calling Kirishima the outsider and defending Shouma as her blood. That hit Kirishima right in the ego, and he actually had the balls to apologize, though it sounded fake as hell. The next day, Yoshino met up with Shouma at the station, her head still spinning. Shouma asked where Kirishima was, and she figured he was sulking at home, licking his wounds. Shouma was clearly over it, muttering how he couldn't stand loudmouth guys like Kirishima. Both of them agreed the dude was unhinged, but Yoshino, stubborn as ever, decided to stick around and roll with her grandfather's plan. Shouma wasn't having it, warning her that she'd lose everything if she chucked her pride out the window. But Yoshino fired back, saying she couldn't throw it away. Without her pride, she'd be nothing. That stopped Shouma in his tracks, his eyes going wide at her bluntness. He told her he wouldn't die for pride, but when she asked what he would die for, he pointed right at her, no hesitation. Yoshino didn't know what to say. Just when she thought it couldn't get weirder, Shouma plucked a breadcrumb out of her hair, thinking it was a bug. She stared at him, wondering if everyone in her life was just built different levels of crazy. Before leaving, Shouma hugged Yoshino, promising to return. She told him to do well in college, all while Kirishima secretly watched. The next day, the train was packed and Kirishima got close to Yoshino. She noticed his warmth and pleasant scent. Yoshino shared with Kirishima that she had always been chauffeured to school in Osaka, except when she walked with Shouma in middle school. Mentioning his name made Kirishima's bloodlust aura flare, but he smiled as if nothing had happened. In class, she wondered if he was bored of her. Later, while sorting clothes, she got irritated thinking about him and he appeared at her door, asking what was wrong. He delivered a package from Osaka and when he saw she was packing for summer, he seemed cold, thinking she was leaving. She felt his pressure and asked if he wanted to kill her, but he hadn't grown bored of her. Yoshino asked if Kirishima hated Shouma, but he didn't know since he had never disliked anyone. She then suggested they were dating. Surprisingly, he didn't mind. His only condition was that if she dated someone else, she had to do it before him. He wanted to witness everything, kissing or making love, and then kill the man afterward to balance things out. She called him insane and he realized jealousy had driven him crazy. He then offered to act normal for her, but she coldly asked if he was changing to please her. She confessed her plan to leave after a year but said she would stay in Tokyo if she fell in love with him. He was surprised. She thought he could be her ideal man, but she clarified that wasn't enough to make her fall for him. Frustrated, she told him to stop pretending and go wild. Relieved, he declared his love for her and said he would always love her. She asked him to leave, needing a break to change and eat. The next morning, Yoshino woke up feeling like she'd been hit by a truck, catching a nasty summer cold. She called in sick, telling Kirishima not to bother checking on her. Of course, that didn't stop him. He rang her doorbell, sweaty and out of breath like he'd been running marathons just to grab her meds. After cooling off for a bit, he tried playing hero, saying he was skipping school to play nurse. She wasn't having it, though, insisting she just needed some rest and didn't need a hospital visit. She pushed him to go back to class, but he wasn't backing down. He promised to text her every hour and be back soon. When he tried calling her later, there was no answer. Panic mode kicked in, so he bailed on his work to handle a client and had Aoi send someone to back him up. The client was shaking in fear, but Kirishima didn't even blink. That night, he showed up at her place, rang the doorbell, and, surprise, no answer. So, he picked the lock and found Yoshino struggling to breathe. She complained about him barging in, but he ignored it, checking her temperature like it was some medical mission. When he saw her fever was off the charts, he called a car and rushed her to the hospital. During the ride, Yoshino couldn't help but notice the oddly pleasant scent coming from him. It wasn't the first thing on her mind, but it was there. The next day, Kirishima called Renji to report that Yoshino was fine, but he wasn't going anywhere. He'd stay as her personal stalker if it meant making sure she stayed safe. Renji didn't care at all. Meanwhile, Shouma, watching his boss leave for work, was already plotting his next move, determined to figure out what Kirishima was really after. Yoshino woke up late as hell around noon, finally feeling like her fever had packed up and left. She was caught off guard to find Kirishima still hanging around, looking like he'd been glued to her side since they came back from the hospital. Embarrassed as hell about how she must have looked all sick and pathetic, she apologized for the awkward mess he'd witnessed. Kirishima was ready to bounce, but she stopped him cold, offering to make him some udon to thank him for babysitting her all day. Back at school, the pressure of the upcoming exams had Yoshino stressing. Math? Yeah, that was a nightmare she didn't even want to face. Kirishima, who barely cracked a book outside of class, offered to help her. He'd only glanced through his notes during class, which made Yoshino want to crawl under a rock. How the hell was she gonna get into college when she couldn't even wrap her head around basic math? Kirishima, being the cocky jerk he was, tried to ease her nerves, cracking jokes about how he'd handle all the calculations for her if they ended up getting hitched. Yoshino's mind drifted back to when she was planning to go to Yokohama after exams because her cousin was moving there from Kyoto. Kirishima, being his usual overprotective self, tagged along to the station like some personal bodyguard, making sure she and her cousin wouldn't get caught up in any trouble. He already had all the damn details, knowing Yoshino's dad and her cousin's mom were half-siblings and that her cousin, who was a year older than Yoshino, was about to start college too. Yoshino explained the complicated family dynamic, mentioning that her cousin's mother was the daughter of one of Ranji's mistresses. There had always been some uncertainty about their blood relation, but Ranji had never questioned it, raising her aunt as his own. Kirishima mentioned that Yoshino's cousin was majoring in international studies from a wealthy background. When they finally met her cousin, Tsubaki Akashigata greeted Yoshino warmly. Tsubaki complimented her, saying Yoshino had a lovely face like their grandfather's, though Yoshino didn't quite understand. She then greeted Kirishima, and Yoshino took the chance to introduce her cousin as his type, a fashionable young woman with big, dark eyes, long black hair and a beauty that other girls would envy. Kirishima complimented Tsubaki on her beauty, impressing her. The three chatted and Yoshino learned Tsubaki had a country accent from Kyoto. Tsubaki shared that her family had always been from Kyoto and there was a legend about Kyoto women marrying late. Tsubaki pointed out some sandals, but Kirishima beat her to suggesting them to Yoshino, who thought they were cute but worried they'd make her too tall. Later, Yoshino overate and Tsubaki teased her for always doing so. Tsubaki praised Yoshino's looks, comparing her to their grandfather, but Kirishima playfully said Yoshino was even more perfect. Tsubaki warned Yoshino about men like Kirishima, claiming they were cheaters, but Yoshino shot back that Tsubaki was no better, admitting she was seeing 3 men at the moment. Tsubaki then asked how far Yoshino and Kirishima had gone, making an awkward joke about sharing a man with Yoshino, which left them both stunned. While Yoshino stepped away for dessert, Kirishima and Tsubaki shared a private conversation. Tsubaki noted the clear differences in how Kirishima treated her compared to Yoshino, pointing out that he didn't enjoy talking to her. Before Kirishima could respond, Yoshino returned with her mango-shaved ice and they headed back for the evening. On the way, Yoshino received a call from her teacher about forgetting to turn in math homework. With a deadline of 8 p.m., Kirishima quickly got her into a taxi. He told her he would escort Tsubaki back to her hotel and the two spoke privately in a Ferris wheel. Kirishima dropped the bomb about Tsubaki's father, a hospital director who had some seriously shady ties to crime and illegal organ deals. He didn't waste any time, going straight for the jugular and asking Tsubaki where Yoshino's kidney was. He was convinced that Tsubaki had only paid Yoshino 4 million yen instead of taking her kidney. Kirishima had already noticed Yoshino's surgical scar, and after digging around in the black market, he pieced it all together. Tsubaki never actually took the kidney. Tsubaki, looking pissed, asked Kirishima why he was so damn obsessed with Yoshino, and he shot back, saying it was all out of love. That's when Tsubaki spilled the truth. She had bought 1,500 milliliters of blood from Yoshino for 4 million yen, draining her damn near to death. She tried to talk Yoshino out of it, but Yoshino stood her ground, saying she'd rather die than disappoint Kirishima. Tsubaki, feeling some type of way, thought it was totally unfair to stop her. After the awkward exchange, Kirishima thanked Tsubaki, throwing in a half-assed compliment about how she was just as charming as Yoshino. Tsubaki didn't take the flattery well, warning him straight up that if he hurt Yoshino, he'd never see her again. The next day, Yoshino nervously asked about the conversation, but Kirishima just stayed silent, not giving her any answers. Then, to add fuel to the fire, he got a picture of Yoshino in a bikini sent to him by Tsubaki. Yoshino's heart almost stopped. She thought for sure he was gonna blackmail her with it. But Kirishima, being his usual cocky self, assured her he wasn't planning to do anything like that. To top it off, Tsubaki got a picture of Ranji and Gaku, just like they had promised. While studying, Yoshino and Tsubaki chatted. Tsubaki revealed that Kirishima had once gone to Osaka to meet Yoshino at 12 but had never done so. Tsubaki wondered if he had been interested in her since then. Yoshino disagreed, thinking he was obsessed with her, not in love. He might stop if she pointed it out, which left her confused. Tsubaki suggested that Yoshino figure out whether it was love or obsession. With summer break starting, Yoshino was stressed. While meeting Kirishima, 2 girls had run off. He explained that they had been discussing an open campus and he would handle the visitors as a disciplinary committee member. Yoshino was shocked since he had never followed the rules. She had thought the girls were confessing, but Kirishima said he always turned people down. He didn't need anyone else. Yoshino was his first friend. Surprised by this, Yoshino wondered if he didn't see her as a romantic partner and if her worries had been pointless. At an event, now Shiota, known for her TV role, pageant win and broadcasting career, was congratulated for landing an announcer position. The woman asked why she had broken up with her handsome ex, Ozu, and she explained that he hadn't liked her entering pageants. They laughed and agreed with her, now disliked them, knowing they called her a schemer. She believed scheming had made her the most successful person in her group. The girls spotted Kirishima, and he acted like it was the first time they'd ever crossed paths. In the bathroom, now couldn't help but remember their brief fling when she first came back to Japan. They'd shared something, but it was over before it really started. Later, they bumped into each other again in the hall, and Kirishima made a comment about how much she had changed, telling her not to try so hard to fit in. He slid a business card into her hand, coming from some high society connection he'd clearly cultivated. Yoshino, not one to hold back, invited Kirishima to the Bon Festival in Osaka. He, of course, agreed. He planned to show up in July when Now would be busy at some cosmetics event. In Osaka, Yoshino made Kirishima carry all her damn shopping bags, the dude walking behind her like some personal servant. In the cab, he couldn't resist commenting on how nice it was to see her smile, which, naturally, irritated the hell out of her. They hit a stop when Yoshino saw Shouma out in the summer heat, drinking, and getting ready to scarf down some takoyaki. She was worried about the building tension between her and Kirishima, so she quickly made up some excuse to ditch him. The shop owner, not having it, scolded Shouma for smoking right in front of her store. She turned to Yoshino, shocked to see Kirishima with her, asking if he was her boyfriend, which Yoshino flat out denied. The women fawned over his looks, and Kirishima, ever the charmer, tossed them a few compliments, smoothing things over like a pro. After that, Shouma got a second round of scolding, and the women handed Kirishima a bit of cash before making their exit. Shouma didn't trust the guy for a second, keeping a wary eye on him. Meanwhile, Now got some troubling news about her ex, Ozu, and his involvement in a criminal case with his friend. She considered calling Kirishima for help, unsure if that was a good idea or not. Back at Yoshino's house, the Somei Yakuza were on edge, greeting Kirishima like they were walking on thin ice. Yoshino took him to her room, where he noticed a trinket she'd made back in elementary school. Intrigued, he asked to keep it, and Yoshino, despite herself, handed it over. Downstairs, Shouma asked Yoshino to help with food preparation. While she was away, Kirishima received a text from Now, wanting to catch up. Later, after dinner, Kirishima told them he was heading to a nearby hotel but would return in the morning. While shopping, Shouma told Yoshino she was too lenient with Kirishima and needed to be stricter, as she couldn't predict his actions. Now noticed Kirishima's back tattoos in bed and reassured her that he wasn't a Yakuza. She asked why he was in Osaka and he smiled, saying it was to see her, but she smacked him, knowing he was lying. He wondered why she messaged him and she said she felt like seeing him again. After mentioning he was spending time with someone he liked, Kirishima headed to the shower. Now then saw a picture of Yoshino on his phone. In the morning, Kirishima joined Yoshino for a ride to scope out a university. She figured there was a decent shot she'd end up back in Osaka, so a tour felt like a smart move. Kirishima, ever the sarcastic bastard, made some crack about already being dumped, not that they'd ever been a thing. Yoshino, tired of his antics, handed him a new trinket with the house key she'd given him before, muttering something about the old one getting dusty. Meanwhile, Now was being shown around campus by two fanboys practically drooling over her. They were all heading to the same party, and one of them brought up how Miku had just rolled in that morning, spilling tea about some dude she'd been rumored to be seeing. Now brushed it off, even though the words made her stomach churn. On the bus, her thoughts betrayed her. She couldn't believe she even entertained the idea of falling for someone like Kirishima, especially after spotting a picture of some other girl on his phone. But when she caught a glimpse of him with that same girl, it hit differently. Like a moth to a flame, she got off the bus to tail him. Kirishima eventually veered off on his own path, so Now, adjusting her plan, trailed Yoshino instead. Two of her fanboys stopped her for selfies, further fueling her irritation. Yoshino, clueless as ever, noticed Now and decided to approach her. She apologized with that overly polite Osaka demeanor, asking if Now could guide her around the university, assuming she went there. Now, faking indifference, shrugged it off, saying they were probably heading in the same direction. As they walked, Now felt the heat of the stares directed at her, but Yoshino didn't even flinch. She couldn't stand how unaffected Yoshino seemed, like she owned the damn place without even trying. Now, feeling smug, casually dropped that she was from Tokyo and mentioned seeing Yoshino with someone she recognized. Yoshino, caught off guard, perked up when she realized now knew Kirishima. Now found it strange how easily Yoshino tossed his name around, like it wasn't a loaded word. Trying to keep the upper hand, now shared that she and Kirishima went to the same private school. She didn't hold back about his past, mentioning the time he beat the living hell out of some students after training at a famous dojo. The story left Yoshino intrigued, but she didn't let it show. As their little walk came to an end, Yoshino grabbed Nao's contact info before leaving, looking like she didn't give a damn about the power dynamics Nao had been carefully trying to play. At home, Yoshino asked Shouma if he knew anything about Nao, but he had no clue. When she heard Yoshino planned to revisit the university the next day, Shouma suggested tagging along since his exam was the following day. Frustrated, Yoshino threw a pillow at him, insisting he study for once instead of lazing around. Since he wasn't studying, she invited him out for the night. Meanwhile, Nao stared at Yoshino's line contact, thinking she was flashy but naive. She wondered if Kirishima's taste in women had changed. Her ex, Ozu, showed up to harass her. He had been introducing wannabe actresses and models to wealthy patrons, taking a fee for the connections. He surprised Nao by claiming to have evidence that she had spent time with Kirishima. He also brought up rumors of her smoking marijuana in America. Nao denied everything, but Ozu didn't care about the truth. He could make it seem like she had. He blackmailed her, demanding she bring Kirishima and Yoshino to a specific location without them knowing what was happening. He told her not to feel guilty for betraying Kirishima since he was the one who had spread the rumors. The next day, Yoshino decided to take Kirishima on a tour of Osaka instead of revisiting the campus. They visited the local aquarium and Yoshino shared her favorite foods and sweet cream treats. Kirishima was surprised to learn she had a driver's license and mentioned he already knew her birthday, April 2nd. However, he didn't talk much about himself. Yoshino tried to snap candid photos of him, but he noticed and caught her off guard. To learn more about him, she asked when he had gotten his first girlfriend. He told her it had been in 6th grade, but she was more of a patron than a girlfriend. His grandfather had only given him a small lunch, so in middle school, he had looked for girls who would give him money but never officially dated anyone. Talking about hobbies and favorite foods, Kirishima felt like it had been an arranged marriage. But that was exactly why Yoshino had asked. She thought it was odd they hadn't discussed these things during their arrangement. While she had no intention of marrying him, she didn't want to remain ignorant of him either. Determined to see through the next 8 months, she was ready to wait. Suddenly, Kirishima grabbed her hands, bringing their faces close. But just as he was about to speak, his phone rang. He apologized and stepped away for urgent business. Back at her place, Yoshino tried to explain Kirishima's sudden disappearance to Shouma, who was already tossing around plans to stake out his hotel. Yoshino, with her usual attitude, brushed him off when a message pinged her phone. She figured she'd handle it herself. Shouma smirked and asked if she was getting soft for Kirishima. She snapped back, denying it. If the bastard was in trouble, her first priority was making him pay for ditching their date. Meanwhile, Nao was parked by the window in Kirishima's hotel room, looking like a storm about to pop off. Kirishima, fresh with his manipulative charm, tried sweet-talking her, claiming she was more important than his busy schedule. Nao, not falling for his bullshit, fired back, asking if she ranked higher than Yoshino. She mentioned their little run-in at the university, hoping to throw him off. Instead, Kirishima just smirked, revealing he'd already known and had expected the encounter. This was the part that lit a fire in Nao. While Kirishima had been in the shower, she'd noticed a text pop up on his phone, paired with a screensaver of Yoshino's face. The bastard had set her up. Her blood boiled as she sat there, cursing his name under her breath and fantasizing about watching him crash and burn. But Kirishima was already 10 steps ahead, as usual. Kirishima had always known Ozu was a snake. The guy exploited women for cash, which was bad enough, but his twisted games, filming explicit videos and making his victims disappear, made Kirishima sick. The only reason he hadn't torched Ozu's whole operation was that he needed to keep an eye on him. Now it was clear Ozu was using Nao as a pawn, hoping to drag Kirishima into his mess and sell her out like some disposable commodity. Kirishima, dressed and ready to raise hell, told Nao to take him to wherever Ozu wanted him. Nao, still furious and spinning out, asked about Yoshino. She'd already sent her the location, worried she'd get caught in the crossfire. Kirishima, calm as ever, shrugged it off. He'd cloned her phone and redirected her like a chess piece on his board. But even the best plans hit snags. Kirishima hadn't expected Yoshino to call, her voice cutting through his composure like a knife. She was at Ozu's location, and now the game had just gotten a whole lot messier. Sitting with Ozu were the two men Kirishima had beaten up in episode 2. Ozu explained that he had told Now to bring Kirishima and Yoshino to the warehouse he had rented, which upset the men. They were furious that Ozu hadn't believed in their thug's ability to handle Kirishima, especially since one had been hospitalized for a month after the previous encounter. Ozu had his men watching Kirishima's hotel and had instructed Now to bring him to the warehouse by 10 p.m. Ozu's thug informed him that Azumi had arrived in Osaka, someone Ozu didn't want to hear about. Yoshino explained over the phone that the thugs hired by Shirori Akaza had likely held a grudge against her and Kirishima, which was why they had come from Tokyo. After exchanging contact info with Now, Yoshino had staked out Ozu's mansion in Kobe. Kirishima knew the location and had left a note for Now. When Yoshino spotted a red-haired man with a perm, Kirishima grew nervous and told her to go home. Though the men they had beaten up might recognize Yoshino, Ozu likely hadn't, as Kirishima had kept her information hidden. Still, Yoshino had insisted on her approach. Shouma, riding his bike, checked Yoshino's messages. Upset that she wouldn't let him join, he was called by Kirishima, who told him Yoshino was hiding in room 211 of a karaoke bar. He wanted Shouma to pick her up while he handled other matters. Furious, Shouma warned Kirishima that if anything happened to Yoshino, he would make him suffer worse than death. Both headed toward their destinations. At the mansion, Ozu had greeted Azumi nervously, clearly intimidated. After Azumi had left, Yoshino introduced herself as Mai Suzuki, reminding Ozu that they had met at a social event at university. Ozu admitted he didn't remember her but mentioned finding a social media account that might have been hers. He briefly wondered if Kirishima had sent her but dismissed it, intrigued more by her body than her face. Now reflected on the situation at the karaoke bar and regretted not blocking Yoshino's number. Shouma burst in, furious to find Yoshino missing, and demanded that Now come with him. Outside, thugs asked where Kirishima was. When they threatened Yoshino, Shouma reacted, taking out 3 thugs quickly with a knee, a punch, and a dodge. Just then, the red-haired guy from before stepped in, knocking out the first thug. He spotted Now and called her cute, inviting her out to dinner. Shouma, pulling her away to bring her along, was confronted by the red-haired guy who asked if he was Kirishima. Shouma snapped back, calling the guy curly and telling him to shut up. Now, the two men were brawling. The red-haired guy punched Shouma down, clearly irritated by his perfect perm being disrespected. But Shouma didn't care about his hair or anything else. He was ready to keep fighting. Yoshino, sitting in the room and feeling a bit frantic, was downing non-alcoholic drinks as she tried to process everything happening around her. Meanwhile, Ozu, having too much to drink, decided to step aside. His phone rang and upon answering, he heard from the thugs that Kirishima had disappeared. Concerned, Ozu tried to piece together the situation. Not letting Ozu off the hook, Yoshino tried to go after him. But just as she was about to move, her phone rang. It was Kirishima. The two quickly updated each other on what had been happening on their ends. Yoshino, now fuming, learned about Ozu and Kirishima's involvement in trafficking women in both Osaka and Kobe, which hit too close to home for her. She was furious, telling Kirishima they had been messing with her territory, pushing her over the edge. At that moment, Kirishima said something that caught her completely off guard. He decided it was finally time to tell her something he had been holding back, the details of his upcoming birthday. He confessed that he was turning 18 on November 13th of that year, something he had never shared with anyone before. He explained he didn't have strong preferences when it came to food, but he liked eating with her. And as for hobbies, while he didn't have any, he'd love to do whatever she enjoyed as long as they were together. Then, the unexpected happened. He asked her to marry him. Yoshino, completely stunned, was left speechless. The situation was absurd. Here they were, amid threats and danger, and he was proposing marriage? But Kirishima, with all sincerity, believed they were meant to be together. In his mind, no other man would be right for her. He was the only one who could truly care for her. Yoshino's reaction was a mix of disbelief and confusion. Who would propose this in such a chaotic moment? But Kirishima remained convinced that it was their destiny. He then proposed a wager. Since he couldn't marry her right now, they would settle things another way. If he could take care of Ozu and the thugs before midnight and beat her in a game, she would agree to be his girlfriend. Yoshino wove through the thick crowd at the fireworks event, her eyes locked on her target. With frustration boiling over, she ripped her pricey skirt to move faster, cursing herself for wearing something so damn impractical. Somewhere nearby, a gang of meathead thugs was sniffing around for Kirishima, but he had already dealt with 2 of them. He'd ambushed them like a ghost in the night, leaving one battered and the other spilling his guts about their plans. Yoshino spotted Ozu getting dragged around by a thug who looked like he wanted to smash his skull in. Ozu, ever the slimy storyteller, started rambling about a so-called legendary high school Yakuza named Azumi Suou. He claimed Azumi had once saved his sorry ass from another gang that mysteriously vanished afterward. But of course, Ozu's luck wasn't about to hold out. The thug head butt him hard enough to shut him up, then growled for Yoshino to step out of the shadows. Meanwhile, Kirishima was tying up loose ends, as he always did. After squeezing his thug informant for every scrap of intel, he had the idiot call his buddies to gather them all in one spot. Smirking like the devil, he sent them his own GPS coordinates, making it clear he wasn't about to waste time hunting them down one by one. He casually dropped that he'd let them skate by in Japan after what they'd pulled with Shirori, but tonight, they were all going down. Back at the fireworks event, the thug mistook Yoshino for Kirishima. It didn't take long for him to threaten her, fists clenched and ready to break bones. When he lunged at her, the lights cut out, shrouding the area in pitch-black chaos. Yoshino took her chance, landing a desperate strike, but her smug triumph was short-lived. The thug countered, knocking the wind out of her with a brutal punch. As he loomed over her, ready to finish her off, Yoshino called out for Kirishima. Her voice, shaky but defiant, bought her just enough time to crawl away. Then, like a vengeful shadow, Kirishima emerged in the darkness. The thugs didn't stand a chance. He dismantled them one by one, his movements precise and merciless, leaving a trail of groaning bodies in his wake. But the game shifted when he faced Azumi Suou. This wasn't just some thug with a pipe, this was the real deal. The fireworks exploded in the distance, casting brief flashes of light over the battlefield as Kirishima squared up with a shadow from Ozu's twisted past. Yoshino, still reeling from the pain of her busted tooth, was sprinting through the maze of streets with the last thug hot on her heels. Bloodied and pissed off, she cooked up a desperate plan on the fly and slipped away, leaving the thug cursing in her wake. Meanwhile, Kirishima was dealing with his own storm, trying to figure out why Azumi had crawled out of the shadows to mess with him. Azumi didn't bother with an answer. Instead, he brought up Yoshino, asking where she was. Realizing she wasn't in sight, he turned to leave, but Kirishima wasn't about to let him off that easy. Kirishima tried playing it cool, brushing Yoshino off as just another girl, but Azumi didn't give a damn. Tension snapped, and the two clashed. For a moment, Kirishima managed to slam Azumi to the ground, but the bastard shoved him off like it was nothing. Then Azumi came at him with a knife, slicing through the air. The struggle was a brutal dance of fists and blades until Azumi, in a sick twist, revealed his face and sunk his teeth into Kirishima like a rabid dog. That's when the pieces clicked for Kirishima. He knew this face, or at least, the one it used to be. The fight raged on, Azumi yanking the knife out of his wound like it was no big deal. But then the lights blazed back on, and Kirishima seized the upper hand. Azumi, grinning like a bored psychopath, shrugged it all off. He claimed he didn't have time for this crap and started walking away. Kirishima called after him, throwing taunts to reel him back, but Azumi wasn't biting. In the parking lot, Yoshino found herself cornered by the thug who'd been dogging her. Gritting her teeth, she grabbed a bicycle and sent it crashing into him, knocking him flat. While he scrambled to recover, she spotted an exposed wire nearby and used it to fry the bastard until he stopped moving. Back at the karaoke bar, Shouma was locked in his own brawl. With a slick move, he sent his opponent crashing to the floor. The thug, already frustrated, got a message from Azumi and nearly lost it. All that effort for nothing. He ended the fight and threw Shouma a warning, telling him to quit messing with Yakuza business if he wanted to keep his skin intact. Before storming off, he made it clear that Curly was a name Shouma would regret using again. At the fireworks event, Ozu, battered and bruised, faced a bloodied and vengeful Yoshino and Kirishima. At a bar, Kirishima insisted on sewing up Yoshino's skirt despite her objections, wanting to keep her underwear hidden. She was puzzled by how he had a sewing needle, and he showed her the bag from the convenience store where he had just bought it, along with a cold compress for her face. Yoshino had had enough, but Kirishima couldn't get over someone hitting her. She reminded him to move on, especially after he had beaten the Yakuza member who might have been dead this time. However, Ozu wasn't there for casual talk. Yoshino mentioned the location of Ozu's apartment, the center of the trafficking operation. It had taken effort to pinpoint it, as even Kirishima didn't know. After a 3-hour stakeout, Yoshino followed a car with a Tokyo plate to a hotel where Ozu and the punks who had been with Shiroya Kaza met. She wasn't sure of Ozu's connection to them, but the Tokyo car pointed to something involving Kirishima. Kirishima was displeased. Wasn't it that Yoshino had gotten Ozu to eat out with her? Ozu denied any wrongdoing, claiming he knew Now and Kirishima had been together and was worried about seeing them reconnect. Kirishima, nervous, was interrupted by Now and Shuma's arrival. He tried to deny his guilt while Ozu continued his defense. Kirishima admitted he was impressed with Ozu's ability to avoid leaving evidence of anything illegal. He had tried to find something to use against him but had failed. Still, Ozu's family wasn't as careful. Kirishima recalled that Ozu's father was a top executive and his mother was about to become a main newscaster that fall. They appeared to be a model family, but Kirishima shattered that image by showing a video of Ozu's mother with another man. She had lied to Ozu's father, claiming she was at work, while the man in the footage complimented her, saying he couldn't believe she had a college-aged son. Enraged, Ozu threw the phone down. Kirishima knew it had been harsh but had arranged the situation deliberately. He felt Ozu had no right to be angry, as he used women similarly. He had set up the same encounter for Ozu's mother. Kirishima's demand was simple. Ozu had to remove all the scandalous material on Now and never contact her again. After that, Kirishima would decide what to do with the video of Ozu's mother. Ozu wasn't backing down. He threatened to tell the cops that a Yakuza was after him, believing he could ruin Kirishima and Yoshino's lives. Yoshino and Kirishima exchanged glances and Yoshino calmly countered that she could easily ruin his life. Even if she couldn't prove he had given alcohol to a minor, she could find something to tarnish his spotless record. Ozu was stunned to learn she was underage, not expecting her to look so mature. Offended by being called old, Yoshino showed him her driver's license to prove her age. She clarified that people worried about their reputations were those with something to lose, like Ozu. She had nothing to protect and wasn't afraid to walk away. She was serious. Ozu, pissed off but defeated, admitted his loss, and Now's recording ensured he would keep his word. With the ordeal over, Yoshino fussed over Shouma, who was surprisingly calm despite being beaten up. He shrugged it off but was more surprised she'd followed Ozu in the mini-truck. Embarrassed, Yoshino explained it was all she could find and needed to get to work without anyone knowing. Shouma, annoyed she hadn't picked up her phone, got frustrated with her excuse. She apologized, explaining she hadn't expected Kirishima to drag him into this, assuming he'd be fine. But when she teased him about being beaten up again, he grabbed at her face. Meanwhile, Kirishima escorted Now, who was upset with his methods. She couldn't believe Yoshino had put up with him. Kirishima, though, was more concerned about whether Yoshino had said anything to Now about him, maybe calling him a handsome scumbag. Yoshino had only referred to Kirishima as an acquaintance and didn't seem interested in him. Now thought Kirishima had little chance with Yoshino and didn't think much of her attitude. Kirishima complimented Now, smart, cute, considerate, and good in bed, but added that nothing made her special to him. He'd sleep with anyone, even strangers. His comment got her to slap him, but Now soon realized he had baited her. Getting into her taxi, she told him never to contact her again and planned to delete him as well. When Yoshino arrived, Now scoffed before the taxi drove off. Kirishima apologized for everything and was impressed by Yoshino's ability to track him perfectly. Yoshino admitted she had followed him using the mini-truck the entire time. He hadn't realized it was her until then, though he had suspected something was off because the mini-truck had tinted windows. She had followed him from the start, even watching him leave the hotel with Now on the first night in Osaka. Later, Yoshino bumped into Now at college, still unclear about the situation but suspecting Kirishima was up to something. She explained how she had found Ozu's location. Shouma had contacted real estate agents, which had led her to an apartment rented by Ozu, the son of an Embrace Productions executive. She also discovered that Ozu went to the same school as Now and they followed each other, connecting the dots. Kirishima then mentioned the tracking device Yoshino had given him. She was surprised he figured it out but admitted being careless since it was her first gift to him. The tracker, sewn into a plush, had cost her 30,000 yen. Yoshino now realized Kirishima genuinely cared. He teased her, saying sometimes he wanted to cherish her and sometimes ruin her. She quickly chose being cherished and he admitted he was glad she was now interested. He preferred her hate to indifference. It gave him better chances of them getting together. After winning her challenge, he asked what he needed to do to be her boyfriend. Yoshino, flustered, suggested rock paper scissors. Kirishima accepted, and though she was a pro, Yoshino lost both rounds. Kirishima celebrated but Yoshino refused, calling for a best of 3. Elsewhere, a mysterious man learned they were in Osaka, eager to deal with them. Yoshino visited her family's grave where her grandfather, Boss Somei, placed a can of beer on her father's grave. He humorously said her father hadn't drunk because he was afraid of hangovers. Yoshino reflected on how she would soon be the same age her father had been when he married at 19 and couldn't imagine taking on such responsibilities. She started feeling unwell from the injury she had sustained earlier. Boss noticed her makeup and suggested she try something bolder, which annoyed Yoshino. Later, Yoshino thanked Tsubaki for the makeup that covered her bruises. Tsubaki wondered about her teeth and Yoshino mentioned that she had visited the dentist. Kirishima showed up, offering to help her find a dentist in Tokyo and carry her bag, but Yoshino declined. Tsubaki warned Yoshino that Mr. Ranji had found out. Shouma interrupted, saying he wasn't angry but warned Yoshino not to lie. Tsubaki insulted him and the argument escalated. Yoshino reassured Kirishima that it was normal. Kirishima asked if this always happened and Yoshino reflected on the first time Tsubaki had met Shouma in a bathroom. Yoshino seemed distracted. Kirishima brushed an eyelash from her face and jealous Shouma grabbed her hand. Tsubaki called him childish and Kirishima agreed, noting that both acted similarly. Boss Somei told a story about damaging a bike to cover an accident. Kirishima laughed and Boss added that Miyama had once laughed at him but then punched him afterward. Yoshino processed this and glanced at Kirishima, who quickly looked away. A new guest arrived and Boss asked Yoshino to oversee the cleanup. She agreed and Shouma was told to go to the basement. In the cellar, Boss played golf. Kirishima noticed blood on the wall and asked about the scar. Boss mentioned a fight with Shouma. Boss questioned Kirishima about his actions in Osaka and Kirishima admitted to handling a personal issue but didn't go into details. Boss slapped him, demanding more answers. Kirishima explained that it involved his ex, not the Yakuza group or the entertainment exec's son. Boss blamed Kirishima for Yoshino's secretive behavior and told him to take responsibility. He warned Kirishima to take better care of Yoshino. Tsubaki asked if Yoshino had told Shouma about Kirishima. Yoshino explained that it wasn't a relationship, just a result of losing a game. Tsubaki teased her and advised caution, assuring her that Kirishima wouldn't force anything. Tsubaki warned Yoshino about Kirishima's charm, suggesting he could exploit her. Yoshino, not looking for love, brushed it off. She then wondered where Kirishima had gone. In a park, Shouma and Kirishima argued about Yoshino, with Kirishima revealing that they were romantically involved. Shouma punched him, saying that Yoshino didn't belong to either of them. Later, Yoshino told Tsubaki she had tracked Kirishima with a GPS keychain and found him at a nearby park. Yoshino felt uneasy and grabbed a baseball bat, deciding to confront Kirishima. At the park, Shouma and Kirishima were in a fierce fight, with Kirishima escalating it by pulling out a knife. Yoshino arrived, tripped, and sarcastically ordered them to fix their shirts. She explained to Tsubaki that she had used this method with Shouma to stop fights. Yoshino playfully made Shouma flick her forehead and the conversation shifted. Kirishima admitted he wouldn't hurt Yoshino, which led to a flashback where she recalled a compliment from Kirishima and Shuma's harsh response. Yoshino scolded Kirishima for starting the fight and asked why he had confronted Shah. He admitted that he had wanted to claim Yoshino as his. Yoshino told Kirishima that she had dated him not just because of the bet but because of her growing feelings. She revealed that her relationship with Shouma had influenced her decision to date Kirishima, warning him not to forget that. Kirishima silently accepted Yoshino's words. She asked him and Tsubaki to leave so she could speak privately with Shouma. She assured Kirishima they would resolve things once they were back in Tokyo. As Kirishima and Tsubaki walked away, Tsubaki commented on Yoshino's perceptiveness. He mentioned that Kirishima had been trying to hide his injuries from her, suggesting that Yoshino didn't need such consideration. He advised Kirishima to invite Yoshino to study together after school, implying it was a typical high school activity, and ended with a remark about interesting love lives. Meanwhile, Yoshino and Shouma discussed her relationship with Kirishima. Shouma criticized her indecisiveness, but Yoshino teased him about his past relationships. She revealed that she was dating Kirishima but wasn't sure about the future. Shouma joked that the man would need to be able to kill him if he were to marry her. Yoshino playfully suggested they could live together in the future, but Shouma would need to quit smoking first. Shouma, irritated, clicked his tongue in response. Kirishima returned to Tokyo, tired from the trip, as Suta unloaded the car. Yoshino insisted on carrying her luggage despite their offers. She asked for the time and Kirishima replied that it was 7 p.m., saying it was perfect. Yoshino and Suta left together. The next day, Kirishima looked for Yoshino to attend a summer course but learned that Suta had seen her off earlier. Later, he casually mentioned it to Yoshino but she ignored him. He then suggested having a parfait but she brushed him off. He offered his help on the metro and mentioned that it would rain in 2 days, suggesting they try the futon. Yoshino continued ignoring him. Frustrated, Kirishima asked what was wrong. Just then Suta greeted them and mentioned seeing Yoshino off. Yoshino clarified that she had returned alone, stunning them. Suta asked if Kirishima had upset her. Kirishima recalled a fight with Shouma and Yoshino, telling him to return to Tokyo. Kirishima called Tsubaki, explaining that he had been ringing Yoshino's doorbell for an hour. Tsubaki warned him to stop, as it would make things worse. Kirishima wondered if Yoshino was still angry, but Tsubaki said she needed time to cool off due to the knife incident. Tsubaki estimated it would last at least 24 hours and mentioned a dinner date with Mr. Renji. The next day, Kirishima tried to reconcile by bringing simmered vegetables but she didn't respond. He then borrowed ingredients from Suta to bake but still received no reply. Determined, he borrowed more complex baking supplies, mirror glaze, cocoa butter, and made a special cake, pleading for Yoshino to open the door, apologizing and emphasizing the importance of their conversation. Yet, she continued to ignore him. Frustrated after 48 hours of silence, Kirishima grumbled. A bald man said, "I couldn't care less," while another asked about the food. Kirishima shrugged, saying it would spoil soon. Suta asked if Yoshino was still ignoring him. Kirishima explained that she usually forgave him after an apology. The bald man teased him, calling him a masochist. Kirishima wondered if Yoshino no longer recognized him. The bald man called him crazy. Kirishima jokingly suggested seeing a brain surgeon, earning a few smacks from the bald man. Kirishima knocked on Yoshino's door in the rain. Noticing it was nearly 7 p.m., Yoshino opened it, surprised. He commented on her beauty and she revealed that she had set an alarm for their return 3 days ago. Kirishima asked if it was over. Yoshino said it depended on him and he didn't know why she was angry. Yoshino set some rules. Kirishima couldn't contact Shouma without her permission and should ignore him if trouble arose. She explained her frustration with his casual apologies, which made her feel ignored, and warned him of the consequences if it happened again. Kirishima admitted he might catch a cold. Yoshino scolded him but said they would handle everything together. Kirishima agreed, then picked her up, calling her beautiful and saying he could admire her forever. Yoshino teased Kirishima's compliments and he said he was just being honest. He was glad she was wearing his gift. Yoshino explained that she wore it to avoid upsetting him, preferring jeans and rarely wearing gifts. Kirishima joked that she kept them in case she needed bail money for him, and she clarified that he was the only one she worried about. Kirishima joked that Shouma would be perfect for the Yakuza, but Yoshino reassured him that Shouma was doing well. Kirishima said he didn't trust anyone and didn't want the Yakuza life, unlike Shouma. Yoshino asked if there was someone else Kirishima preferred and he insisted that no one compared to her. She asked about his lack of friends, prompting him to ask about her past. Yoshino shared how she had avoided delinquency despite being gossiped about as a child and how Shouma had kept others away. She then asked about his past. Kirishima said connecting with others was a waste since they hadn't grown up together. He wished they had attended school together. Yoshino joked that they could have been childhood friends and Kirishima agreed, but she reminded him that they were a couple now. Yoshino asked what he wanted to do now that they were dating. Kirishima awkwardly asked if he could hold her hand and she agreed. He noticed it was cold but she explained it was natural. She offered cream for his scar but he mistakenly licked it, angering her. She scolded him and refused his apology for the parfait promise. A news report covered a dump truck crash. Yoshino tried reaching Shouma but he didn't respond. Kirishima reassured her but she needed to finalize a contract. Shouma called, downplaying the crash and explaining that it was part of internal chaos since the leader's arrest, with Yoshino's grandfather handling the fallout. The scene cut to the Kirigaya office, where the aftermath of the recent accident was brushed off like a pesky fly. Mr. Ranji and Mr. Azuma exited together, the tension following them like a shadow. Azuma, looking unbothered but clearly annoyed, apologized for dragging Ranji into the mess. Ranji shrugged it off with a suggestion to grab drinks and forget the chaos. Azuma shot him down, claiming his days of drowning in booze were over. Ranji smirked, cracking a joke about Azuma's past romance with alcohol before strolling off, leaving Azuma to grumble under his breath about the hassle of it all. The spotlight shifted to Azuma, phone pressed to his ear, voice low and cold. He confirmed the problem would be taken care of by the weekend. The voice on the other end sounded confident, assuring him the plan was foolproof and warning him to wait before dealing with the wildcard in their game. They casually mentioned handling Ranji, then asked about Azuma's availability that evening. The call ended with Azuma's curt agreement, his mood unreadable. A subordinate approached, mentioning that Azuma's car was ready and pointing out a wine stain on his sleeve. The boss barely glanced at it, waving off the offer to clean it. He muttered he'd toss the whole thing out, like it was nothing. The scene flipped to a red-haired man standing over Azumi, who was sprawled on the ground and looking like he'd been through a meat grinder. The man shook his head, smirking at the sorry state Azumi had been left in. He pointed out the obvious. This was Azumi's punishment for stepping out of line with the Yakuza family's granddaughter. The redhead warned him to quit playing with fire before it burned him to ash. Tossing a folded paper beside Azumi, he mentioned it was an entrance exam notice for high school.